There's something uniquely unsettling about spending the night in unfamiliar places, especially when those places feel just a little too quiet, too remote, or too old. Motels and roadside stops might offer convenience, but they often come with an eerie, unshakable sense of isolation. Maybe it's the thin walls, the dim lighting, or the thought of how many strangers have passed through before you. Whatever the reason, these places have a way of making your imagination run wild. The stories I'm about to share aren't about imagination, though. They're real accounts from people who experienced the kind of terror you'd only expect to see in horror movies. And what makes them even scarier? They could happen to anyone. First story, the room with no number. Last winter, during a cross-country road trip, I decided to stop for the night at a small motel off the highway. It was late, and I was exhausted. The neon sign outside blinked vacancy in flickering red letters, and the place looked old but decent enough for a one-night stay. The receptionist was an older man with a tired expression. He barely spoke as I checked in, handing me a key attached to a heavy brass tag. The tag simply read Room 6. He gave me a small map of the property and pointed toward the back of the motel, saying, "It's the last one on the left." I parked in front of the room, unloaded my bag, and stepped inside. The room was plain but clean, a bed, a small desk, and a TV bolted to the wall. The only strange thing was the window. It faced an alley between the motel and a fenced-off field. There were no curtains, just blinds that didn't quite close all the way. After locking the door and setting my bag down, I tried to unwind. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard footsteps outside. It sounded like someone walking down the row of rooms, but the sound stopped right outside my door. I froze, listening. Then came the faint sound of the doorknob rattling. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. The rattling stopped, and everything went silent. I peeked through the peephole but saw nothing. Still, my heart was racing. I grabbed the chair from the desk and wedged it under the doorknob for extra security. The rest of the night was uneventful until around 2 a.m., when I woke up to a strange sound, like someone tapping on glass. It was coming from the window. I sat up in bed, my eyes fixed on the half-closed blinds. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. I told myself it was probably just a tree branch or maybe an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I mustered the courage to approach the window. I tilted the blinds just enough to peek outside, and my stomach dropped. There was a man standing in the alley, facing my window. He wasn't moving, just staring directly at me. His face was partially obscured by a hood, but I could see his eyes. They were wide open, unblinking. I jumped back and grabbed my phone to call the front desk. The phone rang endlessly, but no one answered. When I looked back out the window, the man was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At the first light of dawn, I grabbed my things and bolted. The lobby was empty when I went to drop off the key. There was no sign of the old man who had checked me in. As I got back on the highway, I glanced at the motel in my rearview mirror, relieved to leave it behind. But something caught my eye, a detail I hadn't noticed the night before. There were no numbers on the doors. Second story, the silent guest. It was late spring when I found myself driving through the Midwest on a business trip. After hours on the road and with no major cities nearby, I decided to stop at a small, family-run motel just off the highway. It was one of those places with a vintage charm, red bricks, neon sign flickering, and a narrow parking lot lined with only a dozen rooms. When I walked into the front office, an older woman greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She handed me a key with the number 7 etched on it and casually said, "You're in the middle room." Her tone was friendly, but there was something off about the way she avoided making eye contact for too long. As I stepped into room 7, it was clear the motel hadn't been updated in decades. The wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet had a faint musty smell, but I wasn't expecting luxury. I was just grateful to have a place to sleep. After unpacking a few essentials, I noticed something odd. The room had an adjoining door. You know, the kind meant to connect to the neighboring room? Except this one had no handle, just a keyhole. The door was old and painted over, but it still gave me an uneasy feeling. I shrugged it off and decided to unwind with some TV. By 11 p.m., I was ready to call it a night. I turned off the lights and lay down, but sleep didn't come easily. The silence of the motel was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of passing cars on the highway. Around midnight, I heard it. A faint shuffling noise, like feet dragging across the carpet. It was coming from the adjoining door. I froze, holding my breath. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, as if someone were pacing back and forth in the room next door. I told myself it was probably just another guest, maybe someone who couldn't sleep. But when the pacing stopped, it was replaced by something worse, the sound of a deep, wheezing breath, right on the other side of the door. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. "Hello? Is someone there?" I called out, trying to sound confident. The breathing stopped immediately. I stared at the door, waiting for something to happen. After what felt like an eternity, I convinced myself it was my imagination and forced myself to lie back down. But just as I started to drift off, I heard a loud thump. It came from the adjoining door, like someone had slammed their fist against it. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. As I approached the door, my hands were trembling. I leaned in close, shining the light through the keyhole, and what I saw made my blood run cold. An eye. Someone was on the other side, staring back at me. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. Without thinking, I grabbed a chair and wedged it against the door, praying it would hold. My first instinct was to call the front desk, but the room phone was dead. When I tried my cell phone, I realized I had no service. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching a lamp as a weapon and watching the door. Occasionally, I heard faint whispers or scratching noises, but whoever was on the other side never tried to force their way in. At first light, I threw my belongings into my bag and bolted out the door. The parking lot was empty, and the office was locked, with no sign of the woman who had checked me in. As I sped down the highway, I glanced back at the motel in my rearview mirror. That's when I noticed something chilling. All the rooms had curtains drawn, except room 7. Through the window, I could see a dark silhouette standing perfectly still, watching me drive away. Third story, the locked closet. Last summer, I took a solo road trip through the Southwest, hoping to explore some of the quieter, lesser-known spots. One evening, I found myself far from any major town, so I booked a room at a small motel I found online. The photos made it look cozy enough, simple, clean, nothing fancy. When I arrived, it was just after sunset, and the place had a desolate feel to it. The motel sat on a stretch of empty road with nothing but desert in every direction. The office door jingled as I stepped inside, and a middle-aged man greeted me. His smile was polite, but his eyes seemed to size me up a little too long. He handed me the key to room 3, and as I turned to leave, he said, "Let me know if you need anything. And, don't go poking around in places you don't need to." I laughed awkwardly, unsure of what he meant, but he didn't elaborate. Room 3 was at the far end of the building. It was small and smelled faintly of bleach, but it seemed clean. There was a bed, a nightstand, and a small TV mounted on the wall. One thing immediately caught my attention: a tall, narrow closet in the corner of the room. The closet door was locked with a heavy padlock. At first, I thought it was just for storage, maybe housekeeping supplies, but something about it felt wrong. The padlock was old and rusted, as if it hadn't been touched in years. I ignored it and focused on unpacking my things. After a quick shower, I settled into bed and started scrolling through my phone. The walls were thin, and I could hear muffled sounds from the room next door, maybe a TV or someone talking. I didn't think much of it until I realized the sounds were getting louder. It wasn't a TV. It was footsteps. They were coming from inside my room. I sat up, straining to listen. The footsteps were soft, slow, and deliberate, moving from the closet toward the bed. My breath caught in my throat as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The room was empty. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I was imagining things. But as I lay back down, I couldn't stop staring at the closet. The more I looked, the more I felt like something, or someone, was behind that door. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a loud clanking sound. It was the padlock. I shot up in bed, gripping my phone tightly. The lock was shaking violently, as if someone on the other side was trying to break it open. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The shaking stopped. I stared at the closet, my heart pounding. Then, slowly, I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from inside. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room. The hallway was eerily silent as I ran to the front desk. The man from earlier was gone, and the office was dark. I ended up sitting in my car until sunrise, too terrified to go back inside. When morning came, I returned to the office to demand a refund, but the place looked abandoned. The door was locked, and a faded "for sale" sign hung in the window. Confused, I walked back to room 3 to grab the rest of my things. The door was slightly ajar, and when I stepped inside, I noticed something chilling. The padlock was on the floor, broken in half. The closet door was wide open, but it was empty, except for one thing. A single, dirty handprint smeared across the inside of the door. 4th story, the whispering hallway. It was the dead of winter, and I was driving through a stretch of isolated backroads, trying to reach a friend's cabin before the snowstorm hit. The roads were already slick, and visibility was getting worse, so when I saw a glowing motel sign in the distance, I decided to play it safe and stop for the night. The motel was old, the kind of place that looked like it had seen better decades. The parking lot was empty except for my car. Inside the office, a young woman was seated behind the counter. She looked startled to see me, but her smile was kind. "Just one night?" she asked. "Yes, please," I replied, feeling a little relieved to be off the icy roads. She handed me a key marked room 5 and gave me directions to a hallway at the back of the building. "It's down there," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. The hallway was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. As I walked toward my room, I noticed how eerily quiet the place was. No other guests, no sound of TVs or movement, just silence. Room 5 was at the end of the hall. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a small, outdated room with floral wallpaper and a heavy, damp smell. I locked the door, unpacked a few things, and lay down on the bed, trying to relax. That's when I heard it. A soft, whispering sound, coming from the hallway. I froze, straining to listen. The whispers were faint, like a conversation just out of earshot, but there was no mistaking it, someone was out there. I got up and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Still, the whispers continued, growing louder and more distinct. I couldn't make out any words, just the sound of voices, overlapping and murmuring. It felt like they were moving closer to my door. I stepped back, my pulse racing, and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The whispers stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, a loud knock echoed from my door, followed by the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the lock. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and backed away, but before I could dial for help, the door handle jiggled violently. I shouted, "I'm calling the police." Everything went quiet. I waited, heart pounding, until I finally got the courage to approach the door again. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing. The hallway was empty, but the silence felt heavier now, as if the air itself was watching me. I spent the next few hours sitting on the bed with the lights on, listening for any sound. Around 3 a.m., I must have dozed off because I woke up to the feeling of someone standing over me. I shot up, but the room was empty. The door was still locked, and my phone was right where I'd left it. But something was wrong. The chair I had wedged against the door earlier was now on the other side of the room. Terrified, I grabbed my things and left. The hallway was still empty, but as I reached the front door, I heard a faint whisper again, just behind me. I didn't look back. The next day, I called my friend to tell him about the motel, but when I tried to pull it up online to show him where it was, I couldn't find any record of it. No address, no reviews, nothing. Sometimes, the most terrifying experiences don't involve ghosts or monsters, they come from the feeling of being completely vulnerable, at the mercy of someone, or something, you can't see or understand. The next time you book a room for the night, whether it's a cozy Airbnb or a roadside motel, pay attention to the little things. A strange noise. An unusual smell. A door that shouldn't be locked but is. Because you never know who, or what, might be sharing the space with you.